Ever feel like, life's just kind of pulling you in every direction, trying to stay upright in the middle of a storm? What if there was a way to find that solid core inside yourself, a place of like real focus no matter what's going on around you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually.
That's exactly what we're going to dig into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources you've given us and we really try to pull out those nuggets of gold.
Absolutely. Basically creating a shortcut to understanding.
Yeah, just for you.
Just for you. Personalized.
Okay. So today we have something particularly fascinating to dive into.
We do. We're looking at chapter 26, Foundation of the Son of God.
Okay.
From the BFG handbook, which is a Christian edition of the Tao Te Ching.
Okay. Now, for those who maybe aren't familiar, what is the Tao Te Ching?
So the Tao Te Ching is an ancient Chinese text, and it's known for its wisdom on living in harmony with the universe, finding that balance.
Yeah.
And this edition offers a Christian perspective on those timeless principles.
Okay, so we're kind of getting a unique blend here.
Exactly, a unique lens.
Yeah, that's really cool. So our mission today is to really get to the heart of this chapter. What is it trying to tell us about finding stability, having a strong sense of purpose, and not getting swept away by all those distractions that are constantly bombarding us?
Constantly, yeah.
Feels like they're getting worse and worse, right?
Absolutely.
How do we stay centered in all of this?
It's a challenge for sure.
So we'll be looking at some key concepts. One of them is this paradoxical idea of a heavy foundation leading to lightness.
It's a great point.
We're also going to talk about stillness versus restlessness.
Yeah.
And the power of having an unwavering purpose.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So let's dive right in with that first one, this idea that the heavy foundation of the Son of God is the root of lightness. That sounds almost like a contradiction, right?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where you kind of, you read it,
yes.
You go back and you're like, wait a second.
How does that even work?
How does that work? How can something heavy create lightness? So the chapter actually clarifies that this idea of a heavy foundation isn't about being weighed down by rules or dogma.
Okay.
But rather, it's about the solid, unshakable nature of Christ's mission and teachings. It's like those core truths, those fundamental principles that provide a firm base for everything else.
Okay, so it's not heavy in the sense of like a burden.
Right, exactly. Not a burden.
It's heavy in the sense of like very, very solid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Solid.
Yeah.
Like think of like the bedrock,
Yeah.
It's that strong foundation.
It reminds me of that image from the Bible, the parable about building a house on a solid rock.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a classic image. And the chapter itself actually alludes to Matthew 7:24-27.
Okay.
Where Jesus speaks of the wise builder who lays his foundation on rock. And when the storms hit, that house endures,
right.
And it endures because of that strong base. And so this heavy foundation in Christ, it provides the same kind of stability for our inner lives.
Okay, so that's the heavy element, but where does the lightness come in? I'm still not quite grasping that.
Right. So the lightness that's being talked about isn't about being carefree or irresponsible.
Right.
It's more about the peace that you have, that inner confidence, the sense of purpose that you naturally get when you know you're standing on something that's solid. You're not going to be tossed around by every little worry or trend, You're anchored. You have that security. And that creates a real sense of freedom.
Okay, that makes sense. Like if you're in a sailboat and the anchor's down, you don't get pulled around by the current.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a good analogy, I think. And in the renewal mindset section of the source material, they pull in some verses from the Bible, Matthew 7:24-25, and Psalm 62.6.
Yeah.
And Psalm 62.6 says, "He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken."
That's powerful.
I love that image of being unshakable.
Yeah, it really speaks to this idea of having a stable foundation that leads to inner peace.
I know you work with a lot of information, process things quickly. I think this idea of having a solid foundation would actually help with that, wouldn't it? You wouldn't get bogged down in all those little details.
Oh, absolutely. When you have that strong foundation in place, new information becomes less overwhelming. You already have a framework to fit it into. You're not starting from scratch every time.
Right.
It's like when you understand the basic laws of physics, it's easier to grasp more complex concepts.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. All right, so we've talked about the heavy foundation leading to lightness. Now let's move on to this idea of stillness is the master of restlessness.
Yeah, another great one.
Which in today's world, it just feels like a really radical concept.
It does. It does. We're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation.
Right.
Stillness isn't just about the absence of noise.
It's about finding that inner peace, that quiet confidence that comes from trusting in something bigger than yourself. It's that deep sense of calm that can actually exist no matter what's happening around you.
Okay, so it's more than just, being in a quiet room.
Exactly. It's an internal state. It's a way of being.
It's a way of being. And it's interesting because I've read about a lot of historical figures who were known for getting a lot done, incredibly productive people. And they all talked about this need for stillness.
Yes.
That time for quiet reflection.
It's not a waste of time. It's essential.
Yeah.
Because it allows your mind to kind of reorganize, to process things on a deeper level.
To come up with those really big ideas.
Exactly. To find those insights.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
And the chapter actually points to Christ's life as an example of this. He went through some really intense stuff.
Like intense opposition, betrayal, suffering.
But he always maintained this incredible inner peace. It's remarkable. A profound stillness, focus on his mission. And it wasn't passivity.
Right.
It was strength.
Yeah.
It was a source of strength that allowed him to face those challenges with clarity and purpose.
So how do we do that? How do we cultivate stillness in our lives?
Right. Especially when we're feeling so pulled in every direction.
Yeah, like I know for me, the constant flow of information sometimes feels overwhelming, Yeah. How do you quiet your mind when it feels like it's constantly buzzing?
Well, if you think about it, stillness is a really powerful antidote to all that anxiety and impulsiveness that drives us.
Okay.
When we take time to be still, whether it's through meditation or just pausing before we react, we create space.
Yeah.
We gain some distance from all those thoughts swirling around in our heads. And that allows us to think more clearly. And sometimes we can even tap into a deeper sense of guidance.
Okay.
That we might miss if we're constantly rushing.
So you're saying that it's not just about feeling calmer, but it also actually helps us make better decisions.
Exactly. It allows us to make choices that are more aligned with our values and our goals.
Okay.
And the renewal mindset section includes some verses from Psalms and Isaiah that really emphasize this. Says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him." Psalm 46.10 tells us to be still and know that I am God. And Isaiah 30.15 talks about finding strength in quietness and trust.
It seems like having that kind of inner stillness would naturally lead to having a clearer sense of purpose.
Absolutely. They go hand in hand.
Which actually brings us to the next line from the chapter. The Son of God travels all day without losing sight of his purpose.
Yeah, that's such a powerful image.
I mean, that really speaks to focus.
It does. It highlights Jesus' complete dedication to his mission.
Even when things got really tough.
Exactly. Even in the face of distractions, temptations, hardship.
The chapter summary references that story from Matthew 4.111 where Jesus is tempted in the desert.
Right. And he resists. He never loses sight of his ultimate goal.
Okay, so how can we apply that to our own lives? How can we cultivate that same kind of unwavering focus?
Well, it starts with identifying our core values, our goals. What is it that truly matters to us? And it's about staying focused on those things, even when we encounter setbacks or, shiny objects that try to pull us off course.
Right. And I know for you, having a focused purpose is so important in your work.
Absolutely. It's what allows me to stay on track, to learn, and to achieve what I set out to do.
Yeah.
The renewal mindset section has a couple of verses that relate to this. Luke 9.51 mentions that Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem, and Hebrews 12.2 tells us to fix our eyes on Jesus.
Okay.
It's about having that unwavering commitment to your goals.
Now, this focus on purpose, it directly connects to this next idea, which is avoiding distraction. The chapter is pretty clear about that, saying, not tempted by sights of splendor, he remains unshaken and transcends beyond. How unfortunate would it be if the Son of God were lightly swayed? It's a warning.
And then it says, if you let yourself be lightly blown away, you separate from your roots. If you let restlessness move you, you separate from the Spirit.
Yeah, strong words.
That's a pretty serious statement.
It is. It's emphasizing how easily we can get pulled off track by things that seem appealing in the moment, things that promise us pleasure or excitement, but ultimately they lead us away from what truly nourishes us.
It's like those temptations that Jesus faced in the desert.
Exactly. The chapter summary calls that the ultimate model for resisting temptation.
Right. He could have had all that power and glory, but he chose to stay true to his mission.
It's a powerful example.
And the renewal mindset section even pulls in a verse from 1 John 2.1, which talks about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life.
Right. those worldly desires that try to pull us away from what's truly important.
For you, as someone who's really focused on learning, those distractions, they must be a huge obstacle. Oh, they are.
Yeah.
When you're constantly being bombarded with information and stimulation, it's hard to concentrate. Your attention gets fragmented.
Yeah.
And that makes it difficult to really understand and absorb new information.
So resisting those distractions is crucial.
It's essential for effective learning and for staying aligned with our goals.
Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at how all of this connects to the broader framework presented in the source material.
Okay.
The renewal section introduces something called the Trinitarian method, MAP. It stands for Mindset, Aim, Practice. It's a framework for personal and spiritual growth.
A roadmap.
Yeah. How did the themes we've been discussing fit into that framework?
So this chapter, it really lays the foundation for the mindset part of MAP.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a specific inner disposition.
Yeah.
One that's characterized by faith, stillness, and a focus on purpose.
So it's like setting the stage.
Exactly. Creating the right internal environment for growth.
Yeah.
And then from that mindset, our aim naturally emerges, which is to build that strong foundation, to practice stillness, to maintain a clear sense of purpose, and to resist those distractions.
Right.
And while this chapter doesn't go into specifics about practice, it implies that we need to actively work on embodying these principles.
So making conscious choices in our daily lives.
Exactly. Through spiritual disciplines or just by being more intentional in how we spend our time and energy.
Okay. Now, the respond section of the source material brings in a really interesting perspective. It talks about shared truth that transcend cultural and religious boundaries.
Yeah.
We've been looking at this chapter through a Christian lens, but how do these themes of rootedness, stillness, purpose, and resisting distractions show up in other spiritual traditions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the response section highlights the fact that these are universal human needs. The need to feel grounded, to find inner peace, to have a sense of direction. These aren't just Christian ideas. They show up in different forms in all sorts of wisdom traditions.
Okay.
For example, in Hinduism, there's this concept of dharma, which is your essential purpose, your duty.
Mm-hmm.
And in Buddhism, they place huge emphasis on mindfulness and meditation.
Great.
Cultivating stillness to find clarity.
Yeah.
And in Islam, it's about submitting to God's will and resisting temptations that could lead you astray.
Okay.
So even though these traditions have different frameworks, they're all pointing to the same basic human need for meaning and stability.
It's fascinating how these seemingly different paths end up converging on such fundamental principles.
It is. It suggests that these are not just religious ideas, but something deeper.
Yeah.
Something essential to human flourishing.
Okay, well, this has been a really incredible deep dive. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
We have.
So let's bring it all together for our listener. What are the key takeaways?
Well, the main message, I think, is about building that strong inner foundation, rooted in your core values and your sense of purpose. And that foundation provides stability. It helps you weather the storms of life. And it ultimately leads to a feeling of lightness and freedom. We've also talked about the importance of cultivating stillness.
Right.
Finding that inner peace in the midst of all the chaos.
Yeah.
And how stillness can lead to clarity and better decision-making.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, we've emphasized the importance of having an unwavering purpose and resisting those distractions that try to pull us off course. So it's about creating that inner strength and resilience that allows you to live a more centered and fulfilling life.
So I have a question for you, our listener. Thinking about all the demands and distractions in your life, what is one thing, big or small, that you could set aside this week to create a little more space for stillness?
That's a good one.
Just something to think about. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point.
Absolutely.
There's always more to explore.
Always more to uncover.
We hope this has been a helpful shortcut to understanding and that you've had a few of those aha moments along the way.
Those moments are what make it all worthwhile.